Can the Falcons rely on their ground game to do the heavy lifting on offense, or will they need more from their quarterback to beat the Bears in Week 17?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long. Formerly at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast. People know me as Sirius Black. They know me as Mr. Drew. My friends call me Negative Nancy, but you can call me Mr. Drew. And you can become one of my friends by becoming an everydayer of this podcast. And all you got to do to become an everydayer and make this illustrious show your first listen or first watch is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we wrap up the week. Jarvis is taking a mini vacation after the holidays. And so normally we would wrap up the week with Jarvis giving his keys to victory. Unfortunately, we will not be doing that on today's episode because of that. So, you know, we'll talk a little bit later about the futures of Taylor Heinicke and Desmond Ritter, not only here in Atlanta on today's episode, but we'll start off sort of talking about this upcoming Week 17 matchup. And to be honest with you, I don't have a ton to add that I didn't bring up on yesterday's crossover. So, you know, most of my insights into this game were expressed in that episode. And it's just ultimately, you know, whether or not the Falcons can go out there and execute and show up and be the team that we know they're capable of being, but just have inconsistently been this year, right? And if you missed yesterday's crossover with Locked On Bears host Lauren Cox, I talked about sort of three keys to victory that are very similar on both sides of the ball, right? On offense, you want to establish a run, you want to generate explosive plays, and you want to limit turnovers. And on defense, you want to stop the run, you want to limit explosive plays, and you want to contain Justin Fields. And I think, you know, for a lot of reasons, you look at this matchup and in a lot of those areas, like running the football and explosive plays, like the Falcons and Bears are pretty two evenly matched teams, right? If you look at explosive plays generated, the Bears are currently 21st in the NFL. The Falcons are 22nd. If you look at explosive plays allowed on defense, the Bears are 5th in the NFL in terms of 5th lowest number of explosive plays allowed. And the Falcons are 8th, right? If you look at expected points added with run defenses, the Falcons are the second best run defense in the NFL, and the Bears are the 4th best run defense in the NFL. And so ultimately, when you look at those two things, you know, or those things, you just could sort of come to the third key, which is like, hey, the Falcons, if their quarterback doesn't turn the ball over, they'll have a chance. And if they can contain Justin Fields, they'll have a chance, right? And it basically will kind of boil down to which of these two quarterbacks, in Justin Fields and Taylor Heinicke, winds up playing the better game, right? And that makes it kind of feel like a coin flip sort of game, right? You could just like, you know, both of these players are kind of volatile, right? Now, I think you probably feel a little bit better about Fields at home than you do Heinicke on the road, but we'll see, right? You know, this is a golden opportunity for Taylor Heinicke to sort of step up this week and show, you know, he's capable of more than, you know, skeptics like me have given him credit for. So, you know, I think obviously you put a lot less pressure on Heinicke if you can sort of establish that run game for the Falcons. And that's going to be a big question for this Falcons offense going up against a very good Bears run defense, right? You know, very few teams this season have had success running against this Bears. They've given up maybe 400-yard games this season. And, you know, there's been games where they've only given up 20 or 30 yards rushing, right? And I think for that reason, Kaleb McGary's return this week, I think is going to be very impactful if he does return, right? He's been limited in practice the last couple of weeks. One would hope that he's ready to go this week, but we'll see. right? I think the Falcons were mostly able to make it work with Storm Norton last week. We talked about that on the All 22 review earlier this week, where the Falcons were incorporating a little bit more downhill running, which I think is Storm Norton is suited more for than the traditional outside zone scheme. But that's kind of the beauty of Kaleb McGary. Like Kaleb McGary can do it kind of all, right? If you want to be that sort of downhill smash mouth run team, Kaleb McGary's the best guy on this roster, or at least on this offensive line, capable of playing that style. And on top of that, he can play that outside zone stuff. So he gives you kind of the best of both worlds. So that's why I think getting him in this game back, even if he's not 100%, would do so much to be able to diversify the Falcons run game so that they're not solely reliant on one style of running, that they can do all the different things that they want to do offensively in order to get that run game going. But we'll just sort of have to see. Like every game for the Falcons this year, this feels like it's going to be a very close, sort of probably lower scoring game. And it'll probably boil down to which team plays better in the final 5 minutes of the fourth quarter will be the one that decides the outcome of this game. And, that's never a great place to be, as the Falcons, because we've seen so many of those games go in the opposite direction, especially as of late than they were at the beginning of the year. At the beginning of the year, like those tended to bounce in the Falcons' favor, and they have not done so much since roughly about midway through the season. But so we'll see on that front. What version of the Falcons shows up if we get that run game going. Heinicke's able to step up as a passer, but we'll continue today's episode talking a little bit more about Taylor Heinicke. He is battling an ankle injury this week. So that opens up the possibility that we might see Desmond Ritter this week. That, what's that about? But that will get us into a conversation about Taylor Heinicke's future and whether or not his performance this Sunday and next Sunday against the Saints, presumably, could be an audition to potentially be the Falcons' starting quarterback next year. But first, guys, I want to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top tier candidates as possible to interview. And that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. They have the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just any old job board. They have a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many qualified candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, let's plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel, the first of its kind on YouTube, getting you all the lowdown on all the biggest sports stories from across the various leagues and nations. And if you want more of a local flair, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel as well. So, is it possible that we see Desmond Ritter play this week? It's possible, right? Because both Wednesday and Thursday, Taylor Heinicke was limited with an ankle injury. We'll have a full update on Friday's injury report that will tell us certain things about who's going to play on Sunday. And there hasn't been any indication that Heinicke won't play on Sunday, won't start this game on Sunday. So I'm operating under the assumption that he will play, but it does beg the question on, what are the chances that we might see Desmond Ritter play this Sunday against the Bears? Wouldn't that be fun, right? And I use fun in air quotes, that, in a hypothetical scenario where Taylor Heinicke gets off to a slow start or aggravates this ankle injury, the Falcons have to turn back to Desmond Ritter at some point come Sunday. So, talk about musical chairs. That would definitely be it. But I don't think it'll come to that, but we'll just sort of have to see. But I figured it's as good a time as ever to kind of talk about Taylor Heinicke's future in Atlanta, because earlier this week we talked about several potential quarterback options that the Falcons could pursue this offseason, and we did not mention Taylor Heinicke as one of those options, right? And I'm sure 3 of you out there were like, why isn't Taylor Heinicke an option, right? Um, and I think it's mostly doubtful that he'll be back as his team starter. I think it's mostly a toss-up, even if he's on the team period next year. And a lot depends on how this season plays out, right? If the Falcons finish these last 2 games strong under Heinicke, I think that definitely increases the chances that he's back in Atlanta in 2024. The issue with Heinicke is going to be that cap hit, right? He's got a $9 million cap hit next year. That's not a massive cap hit by any means, but for a quarterback. But the Falcons could potentially save $7 million by cutting him come March. And I think in a lot of ways, Heinicke's future in Atlanta depends on how he finishes the season. So, we will be able to assess that in 2 weeks from now. And then B, ultimately what the Falcons offseason plans are at the quarterback position, right? We can feel pretty confident at this point in time that Arthur Smith's return to Atlanta, is probably contingent on him going to Arthur Blank, the Falcons owner, and basically saying, we're going to figure out the quarterback situation permanently, long term this offseason, right? And even if in the scenario where Arthur Smith is gone, which again, I don't think is likely, that new coach is almost certainly going to come in being like, we need to get the quarterback situation solidified, right? So we can say with a lot of confidence that the Falcons will be very proactive when it comes to going after a quarterback this offseason. And I think ideally when you're thinking about long-term, you're thinking about the draft, right? But we'll see how this quarterback class stacks up, right? The current trends, paying attention to the people that cover college football, or at least the draft 24 or year round, I should say, not 24/7. Like the Mel Kipers, the Dane Bruglers. It does feel like the current excuse me. It does feel like the current trends are pushing for 3 quarterbacks to go very early in this draft, right? Caleb Williams of Southern California, Drake May of North Carolina, and Jaden Daniels of LSU, right? And it does seem like there's more fuel to the fire that all 3 of those guys will be picked in the top 5 or so picks, right? And we'll see where the Falcons wind up picking, right? If they lose out and a bunch of those 5 and 6 win teams currently win out, it's possible they could get as high as the 5th overall pick, but that seems very unlikely. It seems much more likely that depending on how the season finishes, the Falcons will pick somewhere in that 8 to 16 range, right? Probably somewhere like 10, 11 is where I probably bet that they will wind up picking. So we'll see how that goes. But if that's the case, then probably best case scenario for the Falcons drafting a quarterback would be settling for quote unquote QB4 in this draft. And I'm assuming currently that's most likely to be Michigan's JJ McCarthy. And time will tell if the Falcons like him enough to pull the trigger on him as a potential top 10, top 12, top 15 sort of pick. We'll see. But obviously, there's also the possibility of a trade up, which I've discussed before on the podcast this week as probably the team's plan A at the quarterback. Like they would love to get up there to get one of these premier quarterback prospects in the top, 2 or 3. But again, it takes 2 to tango. And currently sitting here today, when you look at the teams that are be likely picking that high, I think all of those teams will basically, if they have an opportunity to get one of these quarterbacks, they're going to stick with the pick, unless the Falcons basically, instead of the usual 4 or 5 assets that you have to give up to go that high, maybe the Falcons could give up 7 assets. But again, I don't see the Falcons doing that. This organization doesn't strike me as the one that is going to mortgage their future like that, even if they do love a prospect like that, one of these quarterbacks. But I think the scenario where the Falcons do draft a quarterback, that does increase the odds that Heinicke is back in Atlanta next year, because I think at that point you would like to have a veteran in the room, to develop that, to develop that young quarterback behind or in front of, regardless of how that goes. However, what I think is the likelier scenario, at least sitting here today, is I think the Falcons will will probably, rather than settling for QB4 in the draft, they'll probably opt for a veteran instead. And again, as I said earlier this week, if I was a betting man, I would bet on Kirk Cousins being their preferred option. Their sort of plan B. If plan A is trading up for a quarterback, plan B would be signing Kirk Cousins, right? And then if that's the case, then I think Heinicke becomes a lot more redundant, right? And the $7 million in savings that you get from cutting Heinicke would go a long way to paying Kirk Cousins to be the Falcons starting quarterback. I know friend of the show, Brad Spielberger over at PFF, broke down a recent article on that website that projected some of the contracts for the top free agents, and Brad is very good at that. And he projected Kirk Cousins to get a 2-year, $60 million contract, which I think is relatively cheap, right? But considering that other probably before he got his Achilles tear, like Kirk was probably destined to get like $40 or $50 million this offseason. So that's a relative bargain, I guess you could say. But there's a lot of moving parts between now and that coming to fruition. So we'll see. But it's certainly, while everybody else is talking about, the Falcons getting Justin Fields, like here on Locked On Falcons, we're probably going to be talking a lot more about the Falcons going after Kirk Cousins. And come March, we'll see, who winds up being, accurate on that assessment, but we'll see how that goes. I feel like Kirk, I've seen a lot of the arguments for, we're not going to get into it on today's episode. That's an off-season conversation, but a lot of the arguments I've seen people have made for why the Falcons would like Justin Fields, to me, are not really compelling arguments. It's just like, well, it's just, it seems that there's this utter fascination that people seem to think, and I don't know where it comes from, that Arthur Smith wants like a running quarterback, a quarterback that can run. And it's just like, why do people think that? Like, because of the Marcus Mariota experience? Like, it's weird to me that like people just are like, oh yeah, do you see what he did with Mariota? Like, let's get more of that. I don't know. It's weird to me, but that's a conversation we won't get too deeply into on today's episode. Now that we've kind of discussed Taylor Heinicke's potential future, let's talk about Desmond Ritter's potential future and whether or not he could be a starter in Atlanta or elsewhere. And we'll break that down to close out today's Locked On Falcons. Now, good, bad, or in between, it is tough to root for your favorite team on an empty stomach. So order your faves from DoorDash. And whether your team is winning, order something to celebrate. If your team is losing, place an order as that pick-me-up. DoorDash has the unbeatable deals on everything you need, right? Whether you're looking for your favorites from restaurants and stores, from retail to grocery, it's all on the app that you can shop for everything you need to get game day ready. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23. Subject to change, terms apply. That's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23. Don't forget to use that code LOCKED23, LOCKED 23, for 50% off up to a $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Subject to change, terms apply. Now, the weather is pretty chilly, but the NFL offers over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, stay hot. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with a winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, whether you want to bet money line, which is, straight up winners, losers. You want to bet spreads, player props, over-unders, so much more. NFL, NBA, NHL, all of it is all available at FanDuel. If you want to bet this spread for the Falcons, the Bears are favored by 3. And if you want to put some money down on that, go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you will stay warm and cozy this winter. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. So, as we wrap up today's episode, obviously we'll be back on Sunday with a rapid reaction and a postcast. Check out the postcast with Jarvis, myself, and Tanitra. Although I don't know if Jarvis is going to be there Sunday, but anyway, I'll be there. That's all I know. So it'll probably be me and Tanitra on Sunday. So look forward to that. That will be available on Locked On Sports Atlanta immediately after the final whistle. And then, of course, you'll get my complete rapid reaction on Locked On Falcons on YouTube as well. So go check that out on Sunday when it drops. So our last tidbit of today is we got a question from Dilbond00 in the Discord. He says, Aaron, I'm probably in the minority on this one, but I personally don't think Ritter is awful. Is he the QB of the future? I won't say that. But to me, he has had some moments, and the problems he has seen to me seem fixable with some good coaching and development. I honestly see a lot of similarities between him and Josh Allen when he was a rookie. And if you look at the stats for Allen's rookie year, they are similar to this year for Ritter. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that comparison, and do you think Ritter has a future in the league as a starter? So I don't quite agree on the Josh Allen comparison. You know, you're right that Josh Allen was a very volatile quarterback in his early years in Buffalo. But his physical gifts were just, off the charts compared to Desmond Ritter, right? That's why he was the 7th overall pick in that 2018 draft. And I believe I discussed it not too long ago on the pod about how, being a high pick, being an early first round pick basically is going to afford you more opportunities. And that's basically what Josh Allen got. And that's something that Desmond Ritter is not going to get as a 3rd round pick, right? That basically as a 3rd round pick, he was going to get one shot to be a starter in this league, at least early in his career. And he needed to take full advantage of that. And Ritter did not take full advantage of that this season. Now, I do think your point about him not being awful is fair, right? Because I know one of the narratives that probably will emerge from this season is that, Ritter is a complete and utter failure, right? I don't agree with that. But, similarly, we saw a lot of people blaming all the Falcons issues last year on Marcus Mariota. And I was just like, all right, like, as someone who was critical of Mariota's play, I get why being critical of Mariota's play, but like, contrary to popular opinion, it wasn't as if Marcus Mariota was like the reason why the Falcons underachieved last year. We obviously thought we could get better quarterback play than what we were getting, but like, I don't know. But anyway, the hope, the point I'm trying to make with Ritter is like, I can't speak for everybody else, but I know for me personally, I kind of went into the season expecting Ritter to kind of be like the 19th best quarterback in the league this year. And the truth of the matter was, for a large chunk of it, depending on, what metrics you use, he was kind of in that 20 to 22 range when you look at his efficiency as a passer this year. But obviously you look back at those turnovers that he had, and you basically say, like, if he could have just eliminated like a few fumbles and a few picks, and instead of having 10 picks and 11 fumbles, if he has, say, 7 picks and 7 fumbles, right? Instead, like, we'd probably be having a very different conversation about where Ritter is today, right? Now, when it comes to Ritter's future as a starter in this league, it's definitely possible. It's unlikely to come in Atlanta, right? More than likely for the remainder of his rookie contract here in Atlanta, he'll be relegated as being a backup, right? In the hypothetical scenarios that we already discussed on today's episode, like, he presumably be the QB2 next year behind Kirk Cousins, if that's the way the Falcons go. If the Falcons draft a quarterback, he could be the QB3 behind, Heinicke and that rookie, right? So let's also hypothetically operate as if 2024 will be Arthur Smith's last year in Atlanta, and then you have a new coach in 2025, it's very unlikely that that coach is going to look at Desmond Ritter as a viable option to start. He'll just see him as a capable backup quarterback. So you're going to probably see Ritter hit free agency in 2026, and he'll probably sign somewhere as a backup. And at that point, you're just kind of, if you're Desmond Ritter, you're kind of hoping to have kind of a Geno Smith, Jacoby Brissett type of career arc, right? That when you look at when Geno left New York, he spent like 4 years as a journeyman backup before he finally got his chance to win a starting job in Seattle last year. And obviously, Brissett was kind of thrust into the starting lineup in Indianapolis, right, early in his career due to injuries and retirement from Andrew Luck, and then last year with the suspension of Deshaun Watson. But the last few years, Brissett has been that sort of journeyman backup and probably will continue to be until some team comes along. And it's possible the Falcons could be that team and decides like, hey, you're now good enough to be a starter. And I think that's probably going to be the career path of Desmond Ritter, that, it will be, he'll probably get other opportunities to start and play because, injuries happen, a lot of injuries at quarterback happened this year. I don't know if that's going to be the new normal, or we're just going to look back at this 2023 season as the year of the backup quarterback, as I've heard other people call it. But, there will be probably opportunities for Desmond Ritter to start games, or at least to come into games over the next year or two here in Atlanta. And if he performs well in those opportunities, that will help him. And then when he hits the journeyman backup portion of his career, which probably will last 2, 3, 4 years, if he gets opportunities to play and performs reasonably well, then he may be in a situation where, 5 years from now or so, he may get an opportunity to compete for a starting job, and he may very well win it and pull a Geno Smith with a late career resurgence. And, people are looking at him as, a sort of comeback player of the year type of candidate, that sort of thing. So we'll see what happens with Ritter, but the reality is, he had a limited window to be successful here in Atlanta. He didn't take advantage of that. There are lessons to be learned from that. And hopefully for Desmond Ritter's sake, when he gets those opportunities in the future, he will be better prepared, understanding how fleeting these opportunities are. And so therefore we'll be better able to take advantage of those opportunities in the future. So we'll just sort of have to see about that. That's going to do it for us on today's episode, guys. Appreciate everybody who tunes in and makes this show their first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL. Check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta, 24/7 streaming channels. Check out Locked On Sports Atlanta. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.